Hola, fellow travelers on the sojourn towards truth. I want to talk to you today about what it takes for imperfect people to form a moral association. Not just an association, but a moral association. I think that we have kind of been on a trajectory that wasn't initially bad. It wasn't initially a destructive thing, but it's had some lingering destructive influences on our world. I remember the first time that I heard somebody reference the idea of maintaining a positive mental attitude to accomplish a particular task. And in this instance, it was somebody selecting the gender of their soon to be born baby. And I was kind of disturbed by that. I still am, come to think of it. I had an acquaintance a few years ago observe of me that I'm dark and negative, and they're right. And part of that is a reaction to the cult of positivity that has been extant in our culture really since the 70s. There are a lot of self-help books, a lot of get-rich-quick schemes that just blew up in that time, and a lot of promotion of the idea that you could Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, I believe, is the author of that book. And I'm not saying that there was no value in those things. But the reality is we are corrupt beings. And if we're going to have a moral association, whether that's two people, three people, 10, a dozen, 20, 30, 50, 100, 1,000, 10,000, a nation, if we're going to have a moral association, we've got to deal with some hard realities. And this is one of the things that we need to be thankful for the founders of our country for, is they were aware of the things that I'm saying. I don't know that they would have framed it the same way, but they absolutely had this perspective. The first thing that we've got to be aware of, if we're going to have a moral association, be part of something. In fact, if you find a perfect organization, please, please, please do not join it, because once you join it, it will no longer be perfect. We need to accept that as a deep, fundamental reality of who we are. We need to be self-aware. I'm not too big on buzzwords, but sometimes buzzwords, and especially when they're first become a viral idea, have some benefit and have some potential for helping us. And one of those words right now is the word narcissist or narcissism. And I'm really slow to label people. Had with our what I've referred to before as our loner babies, and again, I use that. They're not offended when I use that terminology because they know what's in my heart about them and towards them. But I've really resisted over the years with the deep, deep challenges that some of them have had, from being born way premature because of bio mom's drug addiction to just being born drug addicted and various things, psychological problems that just seem to appear generation after generation in these families. I'm really reluctant to allow my kids to be labeled, because once you wear a label, you're a victim, first of all, and secondly, you're hopeless because there's so many of these things that can't be cured. Now, where am I going with this? I think every one of us, regardless of who we are, has some narcissistic tendencies. We have some tendencies. It's just our nature to put self first. In fact, it's our nature to worship self above anything and everything and anyone else in this world, including our Creator. The idea that we've got to subserviate, make our, I don't know if that's a word, make our will, our agenda subservient to somebody else's is difficult for us. We innately have some desire for control over our own destiny, our own situation. And the fact is, because we're corrupt beings, and that corruption is so deep in our nature that it touches every facet, every piece of the puzzle of who and what we are, of our identity, that we need input, we need correction, we need direction, we need restoration, we need recreation from our Creator. I like to say that He created the world out of nothing. Now He's recreating me out of a mess. And it's slow work. And from my perspective, I wish He'd hurry up. The only way He's going to finish the job, though, is to eventually release me from this life. And then when we're in Jesus, all the work that He's done really is a demonstration to other people of His power is perfected in a moment. But it's that ongoing growth process that's available to us that has the most potential for us to being a positive influence and impact on the lives of other people. So anyway, back to this though. If we're going to be part of a moral association, we've got to be self-aware and aware of that part of self that has narcissistic tendencies. And it doesn't always show up in the same place for all of us. There are some situations I'm content to just follow, just sit back, relax, and go along for the ride. There are other situations where, and especially if the chips are down, if it's a tense and stressful situation, that part of me that was exposed to dysfunction in some pretty profound ways early in life and really was evidenced subtly prior to that, that part of me wants to grab the bull by the horns, wants to take the reins and wants to take the steering wheel and shove whoever's behind the wheel out of the way. One of the little illustrations of this element, this distinction in people, is that I have a sister who, when she was born, used to ride around in my dad's hand. My dad had big hands, and we have home movies of her just completely content, at peace, enjoying the view from way up there, and just riding indefinitely, just sitting on my dad's hands. There are no movies of me doing that, because the moment my dad tried to set me in his hand, I went rigid and braced, and I was trying to grasp for control. There's nothing to grab onto, but nonetheless, I was trying to grab control in that helpless situation. So all of us have some tendencies that are problematic, that we bring with us when we join associations, that we bring into our friendships, that we bring into our marriages, that we bring into our parenting style, that we bring into work situations. And if we're not aware of them, those things are going to manifest somewhere, sometimes, somehow, and sometimes much more powerfully than we realize. I had this thought some time ago. I look back and marvel at what a mess I was. I wonder how long it'll be till I look back and marvel at what a mess I am. Got so far to go. So far to go. Thank God I'm not what I was, but I'm sure not what I want to be. And thank God not thank God that I'm not there yet. Well, I guess in a way, because again, the way he's going to perfect me is going to be to release me from this life and take me to the eternity that he made for me and me for, and the same for you. So at any rate, we need to be self-aware about the places where we have that narcissistic tendency or tendencies. We need to be aware of where we're proud. There's some places where, for instance, technology. My grandson has helped me a little bit, and another friend has helped me a little bit to be able to just simply know how to do YouTube at a very rudimentary level. I still don't edit. Someday I might get there, but right now, that's a place where it's easy for me to take a back seat. There are other places, as I've already suggested, where I'm going to do anything, by nature anyway, I'm going to do anything but take a back seat. So we need to know where self is still ruling. We need, and essentially pride is just the assertion of self, the trust in self. We need to be aware of those places where we're proud. And then we also need to acquire a healthy respect for electricity. I've worked a lot with electricity over the years. In fact, I have enough time in that if my current code knowledge was such, I could be an electrical contractor. I have no interest in that. I'm trying to slow down and retire. I do have a couple of trades contractors licenses within the trades, but not in electricity. But at any rate, one of the things you learn pretty early with electricity is you have to respect it. You can't be casual with it. You have got to be focused. You've got to be aware of what it could do at any time. And the reason I'm using that illustration, that analogy, is because we need to have that kind of attitude about power. It's natural for us to want to acquire power. We feel more safe. We feel more secure. We feel more grounded. We feel more assured about our status when we have some measure of power. But power is a dangerous thing. It's Lord Acton, I believe it was the name of the man in the 1800s, who says power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. One of the subtle ways that power manifests itself, and I've had a number of titles in different situations, and when you have a title, instead of saying, well, that's not my job, although that does crop up occasionally, a lot of times when people have a title, it's like, that's my job. And they're asserting their power, their authority, their control over their environment and the people in their environment. I've come to the place where, for the most part, I dread titles and the job descriptions and the empowerment that comes with them, because I know my own heart. I know that one of my gigantic flaws and failings as a parent was those times when I demonstrated and expressed verbally or by my actions my authority, my power, when I should have been much more patient and merciful to just see what God would do in a situation. Sometimes let my kids fail and then be ready to lovingly, mercifully, tenderly pick up the pieces. So acquire a real respect for power, for electricity. Think of power as being as invisible and yet as potentially deadly. Potential in a great and positive way, but also potentially deadly way. So those are the things that I think we need to be aware of regarding the self, as we're aware of self. But we also need to be aware of group dynamics. There's a thing that I call, and I don't think I coined this, but the term is group stupid. The bigger the group of people, the less intellectually discriminating they tend to be. And I'm not talking about any kind of negative discrimination. The less discernment they have, you might say. If you don't believe that, just think about the behavior of people. You go to a concert, you go to a sporting event, you go to a political rally, you go to a religious gathering, and in all those situations, you'll find people expressing themselves vocally and physically in ways that they just would not even think about doing at home or in a small group of people with their family. We become quite uninhibited, and it's amazing how destructive that force tends to be. I still marvel over the idea that winning a national or international championship necessitates the destruction and the rioting of not the losers, but the winners, those who are represented by the team that got the trophy. So anyway, I don't want to camp out there too much, but we need to be aware that there are negative and destructive group dynamics. And how many people does it take to have? Oh, just two or more. Once two or more are gathered, man, this is one of the reasons I detested sleepovers when my kids were little, and they had very few of them, either going or coming. And in part because I remember when I was a little kid, and at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when you've done all the fun stuff and you begin to be real creative about finding fun things to dream up, and you've already done the safe stuff, and so now you're just trying to do something to create excitement, and the tendency, the propensity to cross the line between prudent and imprudent, between good and bad, that tendency is strong. And besides that, you're also mentally exhausted, and you should be going to sleep, and instead you're weaker, lesser self takes over, and it's easy to make a motion and get a second in that kind of environment. So it's important for us to understand that groups do not find validation. I remember being in a religious setting one time where there were probably a few thousand people gathered, and there was a hymn sung, and the guy who led the hymn was just almost ecstatic. Man, that's good singing. And he stopped there, but the implication that I got, based on some other things he said, but that was a verbatim quote, was that God must really be impressed. Now, God's not really impressed. Anything you and I do that we get right, He's the author. He's the empowerer. He's the initiator. And so, if we get things right and we get some of the blessings and the benefits and the positive consequences of our actions, enjoy those, rejoice in them. But remember where they came from and give Him the honor, the praise, the glory. So anyway, it's amazing when a group gets together how they distort even the good things sometimes. Here's a gigantic thing that you need to be aware of. And I'm sad that I even have to say this. And again, this applies to every organization, virtually every kind of organization. There are no exemptions. But unhealthy people predatory, selfish, destructive, manipulative, control freak, psychopathic people go where there's potential power and, get this, potential victims. I remember a conversation I had one time with a leader in a religious institution that was also quasi-educational. And he was talking about the rampant dysfunction of a particular group of people within that body. And one of the things he said, and it was stuck with me, obviously, this is 40-some years ago, was that especially in a religious context, because we're taught to be loving and accepting, we fail many times to be discerning. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to be critical, but I also don't want to ignore the facts, because when we ignore the patterns, and I try not to judge people on a single act, but when I see the same pattern manifesting itself, and in addition to seeing the pattern, I see an escalation in a behavior, there needs to be a response to that. There needs to be accountability. And really, one of the ways you could phrase this whole thing is for imperfect people to form a moral association, there has to be an eager embrace of accountability. Now, accountability only works if I acknowledge that I got a problem. Jesus, one of the most misquoted verses, most often quoted, but out of context quoted verses in the Bible is where it says, "Judge not lest you be judged." That is the introduction to a paragraph. The conclusion of that paragraph is, "So judge with righteous judgment." What's in between? Jesus says, before you take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own. This is how critical self-awareness is. Because until I can be held accountable by others, my demand that they be accountable to me is completely fatuous. It's perverse, actually. So, be aware that group dynamics devolve. Be aware that most people are unaware how dangerous it is for them to acquire power, and how easy it is for their own agenda, their own self-promotion to creep in, even when they're using their gifts, their talents, their ability, their intellect, their education, their gravitas, even when they're using those in productive, fruitful ways. A lot of times they wind up undermining the very thing that they're trying to accomplish, because they're unaware of their own natural human tendency to exploit and abuse power. So as we move forward, there's one more thing I want to say about the awareness of group dynamics. Why do most people go to church? Why do they go to political rallies? Why do they join civic organizations? Why do they join clubs or sports teams? It really can be boiled down, well, it's a generalization, but in a sense boiled down to this generalization. They want affirmation. If you're really like football, but you don't even know how to hold on to the thing, and you weigh 150 pounds, and you can't catch the thing, and you're not really going to be very effective at blocking the defensive linemen who are rushing the quarterback, and you can't run very well, but you can throw a baseball at 100 miles an hour with pinpoint accuracy. Regardless what your attitude is about baseball initially versus football, you're probably going to become a baseball player. Does that make sense to you? So we go where the affirmation is. And unfortunately, the price we pay, and this ties back in the accountability thing, the price we pay for pursuing that affirmation is that there's kind of an unwritten social contract that I won't point out your flaws, you don't point out my flaws. You tell me I'm okay, and I'll tell you you're okay. And we'll get together and we'll affirm that, and we'll even consecrate that and establish that reality by looking around at the other groups around us and observing all the potent flaws in their organization, and we can be certain that us is right because them is obviously wrong. Affirmation is a good thing. We all need some. We need validation, especially if we've been traumatized. The problem in our day and time with being validated in our pain is a lot of times that's as far as human counsel goes. We do need validation of the injustices, the abandonments, betrayals, traumas we've experienced, but we need somebody to say, now how are we going to turn the corner and turn those liabilities into assets? How are we going to turn those negative things into positive things? And ultimately, to wrap this thing up, for imperfect people to form a moral association requires really kind of two things, but I'm going to spread it out because that's how I roll. Authenticity. Again, I've been in religious gatherings where they've asked this ridiculous, perverse question. Is everybody having a good time? Is everybody happy? Is everybody enjoying the Lord today? Well, that last one should be a call to put your heartaches on the altar, but those first two questions, is everybody having a good time? You know what? Sometimes people, and read the Bible if you don't believe this, sometimes by following God, people had a pretty bad time. You know what? None of them regrets that. But that doesn't mean it was fun in the moment. So there's got to be some authenticity, and we kind of operate by the principle that was memorialized in a song, and I won't sing it to you because I don't want to hurt your ears, but accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. And I think maybe those two went in the opposite order. But if we're really going to be an encouragement, if we're really going to not let our hidden life corrupt the public life of the associations we're a part of, there's got to be some accountability. There's got to be some honesty, some transparency. Then here's the other piece, and this is really the gigantic piece of the puzzle. For imperfect people to form moral associations, there's got to be continual renewal. One of the things that tells me evolution is a silly philosophy in religion is that everything in nature, Newton's, I think it's third law, is it fourth law of thermodynamics? Everything is basically devolving. Everything rusts. Everything decays. And the human spirit has not been an exception to that. And, there were people 150 years ago that thought that at the rate we're solving human problems, the world is going to be full of bliss before long. Exactly the opposite. The more technologically advanced we are, the more human abuse there is. There are more people dying in wars and outside of wars through violence right now than there ever have been. In part because there are more people on the earth than there ever have been. But the human spirit is not evolving, it's devolving. And it needs continual renewal. The only way to get that is by connection with our Creator. Now, I love dissecting, and I don't really go very deep here probably, but I love dissecting truths that on the surface seem just inane and sometimes even arcane. But the Bible says, take up your cross daily and follow me. What's Jesus saying? Listen, if you'll face yourself, if you'll be aware of self and the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses and the tendencies to succumb to lesser things, if you'll acknowledge that in your life and say, God, I can't even change that. Yeah, you're right, you can't, but I can, he says. And if we present that to him and we take up our cross and we embrace the corruption of self daily and acknowledge it, he takes responsibility for changing us and cleansing us. The cool thing about our God is anything that he calls to the cross, he also calls to resurrection. And so as we acknowledge our problems and our faults and our failings, he does that renewing work daily. And when I'm being renewed and you're being renewed and we're embracing the reality of our human frailty and our human flawedness, human flaws, human degradation sometimes, he has restored some people who have been way, way, way out there and made something new out of something old. I think of John Newton, who wrote the song Amazing Grace. He wasn't just theorizing, he was expressing the reality of what God had done in his life to absolutely transform him. Without going in a lot of detail, my life may not be as dramatic as John Newton's, but God is transforming. I've got so far to go. One of my fears with this channel is that some of my old acquaintances will look and say, well, what's that guy got to say? He is this and he's that. And They're going to hang labels on me. And if they do, I'm going to have to say, yeah, you're right. My only defense is that Jesus died for those sins too, and he overcame them, and he's transforming me. He's renewing me little by little, day by day, one step at a time. I think the church is a glorious thing. And again, I'm talking in general terms. But I also think it's been deeply corrupted. I hate to have to use that word, but I can't think of a better one, a more accurate one. It's been deeply corrupted by unrecognized human impact and influence and selfishness, and the deleterious and destructive effects of group dynamics, where the hidden agenda sometimes, unfortunately, has become the only agenda. We can acknowledge the corruption, and God can do glorious things with us. I wish you well.